Hi, this is Andy. See if you recognize this scenario. Whether it's a friend or a boss or a neighbor or a coworker, someone makes an ask, and in your heart of hearts, you know the right answer is no. But what comes out of your mouth? Sure. Or a yes. And you walk away thinking, why in the world did I agree to that? You know, we've talked in past episodes about how, unless there's a compelling reason to say no, say yes. That there are opportunities for growth and learning when we have a bias for yes. Yet we've all ended up in a trap that was set by saying yes when no would have been a better answer. So how do we navigate that tension? Well, I'm excited to introduce you to a fantastic new book entitled The Power of Saying No. The new science of how to say no that puts you in charge of your life, by Vanessa. In today's discussion, you'll learn why we're tempted to say yes when no really would be a better answer. If you've ever told yourself you're a people pleaser, Vanessa will tell you why you need to stop saying that. And by the time we're done, you'll know what a stadium proposal moment is, how the spotlight effect plays into this, and learn to recognize a pattern that Vanessa calls, hey, would you make your famous lasagna? And even better, you're going to learn about a potentially life-transforming idea called an empowered refusal. I can't wait to share this discussion with you. Hey, but first, you've heard me talk in recent episodes about our new course entitled AI Made Simple, a practical guide to using AI in your everyday work. You know, the feedback from learners has been wonderful, and it's a course designed for project managers and leaders like you, wondering what's real and what's just hype when it comes to using AI in your everyday work. This course is a great next step to help you stay ahead of the curve. So learn more and join so many other listeners by going to ai.peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Thanks. Let's jump into today's discussion with Vanessa about her new book, The Power of No. Vanessa, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks, Andy. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, man, me too. I've been looking forward to this. You know, we'll get into the ideas of your book in just a bit, but I'd love to ask you this to start with. Whether it's from your parents, Ruby and Ashley, or your grandmothers, Maria and Queenie, how was no modeled for better or for worse in your life as you were growing up?
Such a great question. You know, my parents very much encouraged us to be ourselves and to say no to the things that did not matter. In fact, I was a very good student and destined, as far as everyone was concerned, to be a doctor. Because we came from a family of doctors, and if you're smart and you come from a family of doctors, you have to be a doctor. I mean, a medical doctor. There was no other path for me, apparently, according to everybody else. And so I did the traditional thing, and I did my science, and I focused on math, and I got into a bachelor's degree in microbiology and biochemistry, specialized in genetic engineering, did all of that, and then decided, nope, not for me. And this was very shocking for everybody in our community. But my parents said, do whatever you want, because they allowed me to be me. So I'm very grateful for the fact that I had a family that really allowed me to be who I am destined to be.
Yeah. That's a great story. Yeah, because actually you hear the opposite of that sometimes, where people are decades into the career that they're living someone else's career, not their own. You know? So,
precisely.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I have to believe that everyone listening to us can relate to a situation where we wanted to say no, and yet we said yes. For example, you talk in the book about our fundamental need to belong. What are some of the other top reasons for saying yes? And how about this, as you think about it? Despite your research, which of these remain most tempting for you to succumb to as well?
So there are three main reasons why we say yes when we want to say no. One, we care about our relationships with other people. We are social creatures. We definitely care about how people think about us. We want people to like us. We want to be invited for things. We want to be part of a social group. And saying no makes us think that we are risking all of that, that we would be outcast. We would not be in that group. The other thing that drives people to say yes when they want to say no is the need to show that you are very competent and that you have it under control and you can do anything and everything, that you're superwoman, superman. And that is another reason why we often take on stuff and say yes to things that we maybe not have the bandwidth to handle. And the third reason I found in my work is that we just have never learned how to say no. So the words don't come when we want to say no. We feel very trapped and cornered and feel like deer in the headlights, unable to muster up the courage to say no. So those are the three main reasons. And to answer your question, I probably succumb to number two the most. The fear that I don't have it together and that I don't have the capacity to do stuff. And then I have to coach myself to respond to my own tendency to comply by saying, well, you're not building your reputation if you're taking on stuff that you cannot deliver on. And I call this the House of Cards trap in my book, right? And the House of Cards trap is the idea that every request, every ask that you put onto your calendar is adding more to this increasingly fragile and shaky house of cards. And sometimes we can drop the ball. And I always ask myself, is it better to say yes in the moment and get that instant, oh, I'm so capable kind of feeling, or drop the ball and damage your reputation more permanently?
Yeah. I think so many people can relate to that, Vanessa. I took away from your book that it's almost like we're socialized to believe that saying no is going to make us unlikable, unpopular. It's just a story, but we're kind of socialized to think that they're not going to like us, or at the least, it's going to weaken our ties, right? I mean, it seems like that's just how we're brought up. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's not always true.
Well, no, and though it might be in certain circumstances, I think I overinflate those things in my mind for sure. Yeah. There's so many ideas in your book that once you know them, I find I can't unsee them now in the world around me. So, for example, you talk in the book about being careful about labels that disable. So I hear people say all the time, Vanessa, yeah, I'm a people pleaser. And it's almost like that's an acceptable thing to admit. Yeah. And so why do you recommend that we stop saying that about ourselves?
I really believe in the power of self-talk. And I believe that it goes the way you say. If you say certain things to yourself, you're deepening those pathways in your own identity. You start believing that about yourself. And then you believe that then you have no choice but to conform with that identity and be consistent with that identity. So I think we should all learn to say things about ourselves that we want to hear, that we want to be, not the things that put us in these corners that we can't get ourselves out of. So people pleaser is a perfect example of self-talk that does you no favors.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of others. I've heard people say like, oh, I'm just not a good presenter, or I'm not a good negotiator. It's just so easy to put those out there and people go, yeah, I understand. And then we're victims together or martyrs together. Yeah.
One of the things that we have in our home, one of the things that we say a lot is it goes the way you say. And so if you say negative things about yourself or about others, it's not really a good thing to do. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can easily find the data to support my biases, right?
Exactly.
It's very easy to do that. Yeah, for sure. One of the many benefits of your book is, I think, to increase our awareness of situations so we can respond more wisely. So I'm going to pass this scenario by you. And let's not focus on exactly what to say or do nearly as much as recognizing what's at play. So let's say that a listener, they're in a meeting with peers, and let's say they're a boss as well, and their boss is running the meeting. And in front of everyone, Vanessa, the boss makes an ask of our listener. Something like, Monica, you did such a good job of organizing that offsite last year. Would you be up for doing that again? Okay. So, what are some dynamics at play here that are going on that make it difficult for Monica to say no, even when everything inside her wants to say no?
Exactly. So I talk about this in terms of the spotlight effect. So we very often, when an ask comes our way, we feel as if we are in the spotlight. Like there's this light that shines on you, and you have no choice but to say yes.
Yeah.
And we get into these moments all the time where we feel that there are all these people expecting us to say yes. Now, it's worse when it happens in public, where you've got all these people whose eyes are looking at you and expecting you to say yes, and you feel even more compelled to comply. But it turns out that even when we don't, when it's a one-on-one ask and it's just one person asking another, some people, women especially, tend to imagine this. It's almost as if there's this group of people watching them. The intensity of the spotlight is really strong. And so, what I talk about in the book are some of the strategies by which you can diffuse the spotlight or diminish the intensity of the spotlight, so that you are better able to manage that spotlight and figure out what you want to say yes to and what you want to say no to.
Yeah, very effectively too. This reminded me also of the stadium proposal moment, which I love. Not only do you put a lot of focus on titles of research papers, you put a really good effort, because this whole idea of the stadium proposal where someone's going to propose in front of tens of thousands of people, it sounds romantic, but really, can she say no, or can the other person say no? It feels like
Right.
like the boss is kind of doing a stadium proposal
Yes.
moment right there. Right? And it also reminded me a little bit of the make your famous lasagna maybe request. You're so good at organizing this stuff, you know.
Oh,
It,
thank
it
you.
has a
I enjoy. That's where my creativity is at its best. Where I'm thinking about frameworks, titles, making stuff that's based on the research. So I wanted
yeah.
this book to be something that's based on research, stuff that we know, but make it relatable, so that when you're actually in a situation, you can say, well, that I am not going to succumb to the spotlight effect, or I'm not going to feel as if I'm being proposed to in a stadium right now. I'm going to say no because I don't want to take this on. And I think you make this stuff more relatable when you put it in terms that everyone gets.
Sure. Oh yeah. I will hope to never forget Past the Salt and some of the other ones that you have, so it's good. But, you briefly mentioned it in this one here, Vanessa, and I don't want to miss this, because not only is there some evidence that women will overly maybe feel the spotlight effect, I picked this scenario because she's also being asked to do a non-promotable sort of activity.
Task.
And so I would love if you wouldn't mind just saying, like, what have you found about the gender part of this? And I'd love, if you're up for it, what do women need to know? And what should us men be thinking about if we run into situations like this? Would you mind sharing that?
Sure. So, to begin, no is a gendered issue. Women struggle way more to say no to workplace requests than men do. This is not only my research, this is substantiated by a lot of other research in social psychology. So we know that women struggle with saying no. And this is because women are conditioned and socialized to be the nurturers, to be the helpers, to be much more focused on community building and helping. And so that gender identity tends to promote you to be able to say no less than men do. So, for example, researchers from Carnegie Mellon, Linda Babcock and her colleagues, they study this notion of non-promotable tasks and find, first of all, let me define a non-promotable task. A non-promotable task are all those tasks that need to be done in organizations that are not associated with advancement and promotion. They're all the tasks that someone needs to do but doesn't contribute to the organization in a meaningful way. So things like bringing the coffee and donuts to a meeting, organizing a retreat or a retirement party, taking notes and circulating those notes after a meeting. These are things that no one gets promoted for, right? You're not going to be promoted because you are the best retirement party organizer. And so Linda Babcock and her colleagues essentially find that women are 44% more likely to be asked to do non-promotable tasks, and they are more likely to say yes 76% of the time, compared to men who will say yes 51% of the time. So if you think about all this work, this unpaid, non-promotable work that's being done in the organizations, it's mostly being shouldered by women. And so we need, as
a man,
Yes. So as your question was like, what do you do? I think men need to be aware. As a leader, what you want to do for the people who work with you is that you want to bring out their best. You want them to be engaging in work that is good for them, good for the organization, not work that is stressful and leads to burnout. And so instead of going to the person who always does stuff, it's better to look at, how do I create a culture where everyone pitches in? And everyone takes turns. So if you think about a non-promotable task like taking notes at a meeting, why should it be that only one group of people take notes and other people don't? If there's a system in place where everyone takes turns to take notes, regardless of your gender, regardless of your seniority, you create a much more equitable environment. And then everyone feels that they belong and that they belong equitably.
I love it. And once again, once you see this, you can't unsee it. And so just being aware of it and say, maybe if I, like you're saying, if I'm the boss, be aware of it. But if I'm a colleague, maybe I just say, hey, real quick, Monica, thanks for doing it last year. Maybe, how about I take it on this year? And maybe you can teach me some of these things or whatever. It's just being aware of this tendency, whether we even realize it or not, that's out there. Yeah.
So true.
For me, I have to say the single most powerful idea in the book is this notion of an empowered refusal. So if I had to summarize my understanding of how it works in practice, which I'd love your feedback on this, I would say that when I'm faced with an ask, I first discern whether or not, is the best answer yes or no. If it's no, how do I communicate it in a way that's empowered and doesn't invite pushback? And third, how do I do it in a way that maintains my relationship and reputation with the asker? So, although maybe this is a stadium of a proposal effect by saying, how did I do? But how did I do? How close was it? And how do you like to explain it?
You did it perfectly. So the empowered refusal is a way of saying no that stems from your identity. So I think the first point is you have to look inwards and determine why you want to say no. And when you have a good reason and you have this deepened self-awareness about why you want to say no, then you can use that platform as a way to be able to say no more effectively. And the words associated with empowered refusal are empowered language, like saying, I don't, I never, I always. It essentially, all those words are powerful because they can convey this, they give voice to your values and they convey where you're coming from. It's very important when we say empowered language that we communicate that this is about us. Our refusal is about us, and it is not a rejection of the other person. And that is why it maintains the relationship, because you are saying no to the task, not to the person.
Yeah, that's so good. Just this last week, I had a friend he's in a similar sort of business, and I was offering him, hey, would you like to be an affiliate for this product? Because, I think people trust your voice, and I'd love to share any benefit. And here's what he said. He goes, thank you. I don't take money from friends, is what he said. Now, I didn't recognize it at the time, but when he said, I don't take money from friends,
that's perfect.
Was it perfect? Because it
Perfect.
didn't invite any pushback. I wasn't like, well, I should try to twist his arm, or he didn't go, well, maybe. No, I mean, there was like, okay, all right, so no pushback, and it maintained the relationship. It just felt like that was like a perfect response, right?
Perfect response, because what he did was he conveyed a personal policy. He conveyed to you, this is how I live in this world. This is how I prefer things to be. He could have said something like, I really can't because right now I'm so busy. And those are the kind of things that we see very often. And in my book, I kind of contrast the difference between using excuses and personal policies. So when an ask comes our way, we are so keen on resolving it and getting to some sort of resolution that we often say yes when we want to say no. And sometimes we say a reluctant yes, most often. But sometimes we say no in a way that draws more on excuses than on personal policies. And so one of the things I like to distinguish is, instead of using excuses, which are very short term, like I can't do something, when you state a personal policy like your friend did, you convey a long lasting stance on the matter. And so the way I did it in the lab was essentially in the context of loaning money to people. So as your friend said, you don't want to deal with money with friends. And so what I basically studied in the lab is I gave people a scenario where someone came to them and asked them for $5,000. And they either gave an excuse or they invoked a personal policy. So an excuse would be like, I'm really sorry, I can't give you the $5,000 because I have expenses of my own, I have to pay some bills, blah, blah. Or invoke a personal policy, which is, I don't loan money to friends and family. Right? Very similar to your friend, but in a slightly different context.
Right.
And what we see is that in both cases, in the short run, the person goes away and says, okay, fine. But what I find is that 5 years later, when that friend wants to ask for money again, in the case of the excuses, you've left the door open. You've essentially said, sure, I can't give it to you now, but maybe later. Whereas with the personal policy, I don't lend money to my friends or family, you've essentially closed that door. In the same way, you are unlikely to go back and engage with this person on a business level again, because this person's going to be like, he's already told you where he stands on this matter. And therefore, the personal policy is really effective for the long term, because your values are who you are now, 5 years from now, and 10 years from now.
Yeah, this idea of using standing up words, I love that idea. I think you talked about using nouns, not verbs.
Yes.
And also, it applies to self-talk, not just the words that we say to friends. So would you mind elaborating on those two things?
Yes. I came up with the term standing up words because these words like I don't, I never, I always are empowered. And when you say them, you have to kind of stand up and say them. You stand up tall because they're part of who you are. You don't shy away from the conversation. So I call them standing up words. Now, these standing up words really are very effective in communication. So research finds that we should use nouns, not verbs, when we want to convey a stable stance and give voice to our identity. So I might say, for example, I am a teacher. I write. I am a mom. As opposed to using words, which is verbs, which is, I teach undergraduates, or I I write journal articles. When you use a noun, you implicate the identity. You say, this is who I am. This is the kind of person. So, I don't take calls between 6 and 8 in the evening because that's family time. I'm the kind of person who does that. That's a noun. Right? That's using empowered language and framing in terms of nouns, in terms of rooting it in your identity, communicates to people. This is the kind of person I am. You're less likely to get pushback when you communicate in that way.
Yeah. And I took it as not dogmatic in that I could say, well, I always eat dinner with my family. So that in a sense, that's a verb with an absolutist word in front of it, right? So that makes it even more powerful. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the self-talk is so powerful, as we talked about earlier. This work really started in the domain of self-talk, where I was published one of the first papers on self-talk in self-regulation. So how we talk to ourselves and the words that we use and the language that we use to talk to ourselves really shapes our behavior and actions. And so we need to talk to ourselves in a way that lifts us up and gives us confidence and allows us to give voice to that, our values, beliefs, priorities, and preferences.
Yeah. Just remind us, even if we fail at that sometimes, we're reminding ourselves who we want to be. And trying to get that in there, and that can drive the behavior. So, one of your many acronyms in the book is the ART, the art, and in many respects we've been talking about the awareness, just being so aware. But and we've touched a little bit on the R about make rules, not decisions. And so people need to get a copy of the book to get a full understanding of this, including your dream framework. But to get a taste, what do you mean by rules, not decisions? And maybe a couple rules that guide your responses to an ask.
So rules, not decisions is part of the ART acronym. And the rules I talk about are personal policies. And these are simple rules that we set out for ourselves that guide our actions and behaviors. And these rules essentially give voice to our values, who we are. They lay out the way we choose to live, the way we want to lead, the way we want to be part of a team, how we want to manage our lives. And so I have many rules, and they can take many forms. So there are rules that could be, so my personal policies can fall into 3 main buckets. They might be rituals, things I do on a regular basis. So for example, wake up every morning. I got this from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. I listened to a podcast where he says that every morning he gets up and he sits at the edge of his bed for a couple of minutes reflecting on how grateful he is. And I've adopted that practice, and it is such an amazing way to start the day, to just say, this is going to be a good day because of all these wonderful things. So I've got that ritual in place. I have several rituals in place, as you might imagine. So rituals are one way you can think about personal policies. Precepts are other ways, words that we use to ourselves that guide our thoughts and behaviors. So one of my favorite precepts is be in demand, stay in control. I say that to myself a lot. And it's my way of self-coaching. It's my way of managing stress or the multiple demands on my time as I'm juggling the many hats that I wear. And, by reframing stress to be something like, oh, I'm in demand. People want my attention and my engagement. And yet taking ownership of it and saying, I'm still in control of how I spend my time and my energy, and I get to decide. So it empowers me to make decisions that are right for me. So that's a precept. And I have multiple decision rules about how I work, where I work, what time I work. So I'm very much a morning person. And so I try to, as much as possible, have no meetings in the morning. Morning is writing and thinking time. I essentially wake up to the world, as far as the world is concerned, after lunch. In the mornings, I get up at 5:15, and I get a nice chunk of time in the morning to really invest in my own writing and thinking and research. And so these are some of the rules that you put in place, and then you start living. They just become part of your life. They shape how you live, and it gives you the opportunity to create these zones of excellence that you can that allow you to live to your fullest potential, which is what I really hope that everyone will do after they read this book. The idea that, if you want to live your true and full best life, you have to say no to the things that do not matter so that you can say yes to the things that do.
Yeah, well said. As we mentioned, the goal is to respond with a no that does not invite pushback and maintains the relationship and reputation. So the T of art is totality of self, which I took as make sure my words, my body language, my vocal tone, like my whole self is aligned and congruent with the way I respond. So what are some of your favorite insights about this component of empowered refusals? And maybe an example of how you used one recently in a no response.
Right. So very often we might use empowered words. We might say no, but our bodies can leak power. We can very often kind of convey disempowerment through the way we stand, the tone of our voice, the excuses that we make, the kind of verbal cues that we present that suggest that we are not sure of ourselves. These are all things that kind of subtly signal that you are vulnerable to pushback, and you will be open to having a negotiation about this because your words are not grounded in conviction. So I talk about the importance of mastering the body language, the verbal cues that convey empowerment, that convey a sense of self-knowledge, convey the fact that you know what you bring to the table, what you uniquely bring to the table, and you can convey that with confidence. I use nonverbals quite a bit. So very often, when I say no, I will often use a warm gesture like a smile or a pat on the shoulder to convey to the person that the no is about me and not about them. So the tone of voice that you use, the body language that you use, can convey a no response really clearly, and yet you're not hurting the other person, and you are conveying very clearly that this is not a rejection. In text messages or in emails, it's quite nice to be able to use an emoji. I think emojis definitely, and research shows that emojis add an emotional component to communication very effectively. So a smiley is a nice way to communicate that, I'm saying no, but I still like you.
Yeah. Just sometimes little things like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I know you talked about how when you start a class, how you call it the standing tree, is it? Or the, how you try to use your presence because you're not 6'5", right? But you still use your presence to signal class is going to start. And yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I thought actually that whole chapter, I learned little things about if the head is tilted and the eyebrows go up, and people have to read the book to get more out of that. But I feel like sometimes we use all kinds of techniques, and in some circumstances, it just doesn't get through to some people. So would you give us kind of a brief introduction to what you mean by walnut trees, and perhaps an idea or two to keep in mind if someone has a walnut tree making an ask?
So, in one of the chapters, I talk about the fact that despite having learned how to communicate an empowered refusal, investing in self awareness, communicating a personal policy, using the body language, some people will still not take no for an answer. They still want their own way. And unfortunately for us, we do have people in our lives who behave like jerks, bullies, and we need to learn how to navigate that. So, in my book, I like to use the euphemism for these jerks and bullies. And the euphemism I use is essentially walnut trees. And the reason I use the word walnut trees is because the black American walnut tree is essentially this big, towering, impressive tree with this huge canopy that grows and dominates the landscape, and its roots move out from its trunk around 50 feet. And the reason it dominates the landscape is essentially it exudes into the soil a herbicide called juglone, a toxin which kills or stunts all the other trees in the vicinity. So essentially, it's the only one that thrives at the cost of every other tree. And so all of us can probably think about one or two people in our lives who like to thrive at the cost of others. It's their way or the highway. And those people I call walnut trees. And I identify how we can be better at spotting the walnut trees, how walnut trees behave, and how do we navigate and still maintain our no, our empowered no, even when we are under the shade of a walnut tree.
Yeah, and you give all kinds of examples of the types of things that they say and how to respond to it. So once again, we'll leave that to the book, but I just want to be clear to people listening that sometimes I feel like some people think, well, but what about this sort of situation? And maybe it won't work. And this is a book where you give a lot of descriptions of how to deal with people like walnut trees. And there's so many things I'd like to talk to you about, Vanessa, but let's end with this question because we have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast. Can you think of some things maybe that you're trying to do as a parent, but the parents can do to help kids become better at empowered refusers?
I think kids are naturally self-focused, and we socialize them to become overly considerate of others. I think we need to think about how we can teach our children to be considerate of others, respect others, and yet allow them to express their own identity, be who they are, without necessarily hurting others, right? So empowered refusal is about being true to yourself, doing what you believe is right. And we need to teach our kids to be able to navigate that. So my child, for example, has learned an empowered no pretty effectively because she's heard her mom talk about that so much. And yet, as a parent, you have to walk a very fine line to make sure that you're empowering them to give voice to their values, that they are aware of who they are as individuals, and that they can, in fact, give voice to those values where it matters. And yet, to be considerate. So we are constantly navigating this as human beings, right? How do we give of ourselves to others and yet be true to ourselves? And I think the thing that I have found with empowered refusal is that it allows us to be our authentic self, bring our best to whatever we do. And when we say yes to those things, the things that bring out our best, allow us to make a unique and meaningful difference in the world, it's okay to say no to other things.
Yeah, right. I'm thinking if my 13-year-old catches on this idea and say, honey, would you empty the dishwasher? He goes, no, I'm going to give you an empowered refusal. No, actually, even in the workplace, this is not an excuse to avoid doing what we need to do. You make that clear in the book,
Oh,
right?
no. I make it very clear that this is not about not doing your job, not
Right.
doing what you're paid for, not about not about saying no to experiences that are formative. We all have to do those things.
Right. Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, for those listening, I have to believe that just within the last week, you said yes when no would have been a better answer. So I recommend you get a copy of Vanessa's new book, The Power of Saying No. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So, Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you, Andy. This was great fun. I enjoyed it.